Well, welcome to the Innovative Pedagogy Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Garcia. And one of the questions that I find myself reflecting on as I continue my own leadership journey and during this leadership series is what truly shapes a leader? Is it a title? Is it a position? Or is it even a specific accomplishment? Or rather, is it experiences, relationships, successes, failures, or lessons that we gather along the way? So today's guest is Dr. Kristina Mattis. And throughout her career, she has served as a classroom teacher, a district leader, executive director, professor, and state educational technology consultant. And she is now just a organizational change consultant. And it's not just that, she does many more things. And one of the things that really allowed me and impressed me to have her on our show was just the major initiatives that she continues to lead across schools and district and even statewide systems with helping organization and navigating complex changes that are taking place. And what makes her story very compelling is just the breadth of experiences that she has and the unique perspectives that she has gained throughout those experiences. And even before the show started, being able just to dive and catch up and to see what has shaped life. She was already dropping some very, very wise pieces of wisdom. And I'm so glad to have her part of our show and have her have the opportunity of sharing her projects, lessons, and leadership moments that have shaped her journey. And Kristina, thank you for taking the time and welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you for having me on here. It's a true pleasure.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to just dive deep into this, but let's kind of take it a little bit back and let's talk a little bit about your journey of your career. Like just like how did first off, how did you get into education? Was there anybody that shaped you that made you like, oh, you know what, this is what I want to do? And not only education, but also technology, because I feel like there's a special niche when it comes to those that are leaders within ed tech.
Oh, wow. Well, I would say that is a great first question, Chris. You just hit it straight on, don't you? Um, it took me a while actually to understand what inspired me to go into education just initially. And it wasn't until our superintendent, Vince Matthews at San Francisco Unified, had
Mhm.
brought together everybody during our pretty standard administrator retreat days, if you will, before the start of every school year. And he had guided us through writing your story. And that's when I really, truly reflected on what inspired me to go into education. And it was it was my maternal grandfather, and my childhood was rich and full of his leadership role modeling, to where I actually reflected on it even more in my book, Guiding Transformational Change in Education. And so my grandfather left that deep mark on my overall philosophy in education and in my career. And I had the distinct honor and privilege of actually honoring him at his legacy that he left at his 30th anniversary small veterinary clinic back in Lithuania that he founded, and which was a true testament to his philanthropy and his commitment to education, right? And he established this academy to allow the opportunity for people to pursue their education in veterinary medicine. He
Wow.
was big in education. The one thing that he always said was education is the one thing that no one can ever take away from you. Be thirsty to learn something.
Wow.
Learn always, because and born from his own childhood, escaping from Lithuania during World War II, he said, war can't take away education from you. You can lose all your possessions, but education, what you have learned, your
Yeah.
experiences, no one can ever take that away from you. And so in part, he and my grandmother actually established and were benefactors for the Lithuanian Montessori school in Chicago that I attended.
Wow.
growing up even.
Yeah.
And so all of that truly, I believe, formed that bedrock foundation for my passion to pursue education. And it's something that is deeply rooted in me, but upon reflection, I truly believe it came from and stemmed from my grandfather and my grandmother.
That's so powerful because you think there are many people that we come in touch with, especially when we're very young and formidable, and to see that there are family members and that there are people in our lives and that have that type of impact. And it's interesting you say that because literally a few hours ago I went to go visit my grandmother's brother, who him and his wife are both educators, and they had not met my daughter yet, and it was just for me it was very moving to be able to see the legacies that are there. I'm thinking like, and then as I walked in there, he had a photo of his parents, which were my great grandparents, and to have a photo of there with my daughter and whatnot, and to see just the legacy of educators and how education and academia like really comes into play. So I really appreciate you, and thank you for sharing that. That's very very powerful, and I know that even in my experience people like my family members and even school teachers, but even now entering even the field of education, and even up until now, like there's people that I respect and look up to, and even to the point where like even this month I have some of my mentors that I deeply respect, and they're retiring like literally in the next 2 weeks, in the next 14 days, and are there any other leaders that you have come across now once you entered the field of education? You're like, yeah, that one specific leader, that individual, that teacher, that colleague, that actually also helped kind of continue that influence in that formation.
Uh, yes, I would say every leader that I've come across and experienced. And I do want to say that there is a difference between being a leader and leadership and being a manager and a boss. To be a true leader
Yeah.
takes something special and innate. Just to say that you lead a team does not necessarily make you a leader. And so I've learned what works and what doesn't, and what kind of leadership styles work and what doesn't. And also realizing that what may work for me may not work for somebody else,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
vice versa, right? And so I may have had leaders, managers who didn't work for me, but worked really well for somebody else in that environment of work, right? And so really thinking about my time, I would say my pivotal time was during the climb at San Francisco Unified School District.
Hmm.
It was there that I was truly able to define my professional identity, because that's where I was given opportunities and guidance to just lay that core foundation for what I do today. And it's there that I learned, I would say, the fundamentals of leadership. And it's where I made the most mistakes, and pretty lofty mistakes, but it's also where I was able to learn and grow. And so I would say it's there that I was able to dig in more to my already like project management skill set
Yeah.
and expand that into change management when I led the district from one platform over to Google for Education, for
Wow.
instance. And that was on the job learning, on the job training. I didn't even know what change management was. I had to Google the definition at that point, right?
Yeah.
And that was just over 10 years ago. And I would say that it was during my time there that I also recognized where my leadership fell short. And it was that realization and that reflection well after I even left the district, that I reached out to some people and I apologized because I was not a good leader in many cases. And um, I needed to fix that essentially. And not in this like altruistic, self-serving type of way. It was this genuine need to say, you know what, I screwed up and you got the brunt of it. And I'm sorry for that.
Wow.
And I I I don't think that those relationships may be like 100% repaired,
Yeah.
but they're repaired enough to where we're talking again
Yeah.
and we're chatting again and we're bouncing ideas off of each other again. And it feels better. Um, and again, not in the self-serving way, but it was like I needed to repair those relationships. And it was because of what I was able to learn and grow from. And I would say that having that opportunity to reconcile has been another lesson learned for me, that leadership, you may not be perfect. You won't
Mm.
be perfect. You're going to continue making mistakes,
Yeah.
but you need to be thoughtful and mindful and intentional with what you do so that ideally you eventually avoid mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, as you're saying that, you're reminding me of a topic that's being brought up in many different leadership podcasts, relational podcasts, and even counseling podcasts. And that's the whole idea of being self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
And I really commend you for that. And that's something I find very, very powerful when we can admit that we've made a mistake, or when we try to repair or restore a relationship. And I look at that for many facets. I look at first on the facet of, when we do that, we're doing it more for ourselves. We're doing it for our, per se, soul searching aspect of like, I want to make things right. I just want to make things right. And,
Mm-hmm.
and give the other person an opportunity, whether they take it or not, or maybe they'll take my apology in another few years, and maybe they need time to process it or whatnot. But
Mm-hmm.
it's important just to at least lay it out there.
Right.
And then the other aspect of it is also, I've always been the type, and this is just my conviction as far as, and I want to model and live my life with my colleagues the way I expect my students to live with each other as well. And if we are practicing and preaching, and especially during the year and a half that I served as a school administrator, the whole idea of restorative practices and restoring relationships, which is like the heart of it, is then I want to be able to do that as well with my colleagues and with people that I've worked with. And I'm a big aspect, as far as my biggest thought on that is that I want to be able to model that, and I want to be able to showcase that. So when students ask me, well, like, how do I know that you're not over here causing trouble or whatnot? And I share that because there's been times where my students, I'm teaching a class and I have students that are talking in the background, and I'm saying like, hey, excuse me, I need everyone to focus here. And then yet I'll attend a professional development, and then I have colleagues of mine that were sitting in the back, and they're having conversations. I'm like, wait. Like, I want to give the person leading the PD the same respect that I'm asking from my students when I'm teaching them as well. So, but again, I digress, and I just wanted to
No,
just
no, no.
emphasize, yeah, like,
What's interesting is that initially, right, it was one of the most I would say challenging professional hurdles for me was that initially the input and feedback that I received was that I was too nice and that it was my niceness that was that leadership hurdle. And it was because and it's not to conflate that being nice and kind is a sign of weakness. It was
right,
that I
right.
was timid in my niceness, which also led to then being vague and ambiguous and this
Mm,
fusion of decision making and these ongoing circles of indecisiveness, and I didn't want to offend anybody, and I didn't want to impose on anybody. I was afraid, right? Not
Yeah. Yeah.
I was timid, right? And when that feedback came into me, um, in this very, I would say, like what Kim Scott would say in Radical Candor, you care personally, you challenge directly, and you try to understand where the person is coming from, but you need to see a change in how they are then improving and how they're working on something. And so it was almost as if I went from one extreme to the other extreme on the spectrum. And so uh and it neither were working. So I had to keep refining my leadership and my skills and my ability to then navigate those leadership moments. And and honestly, you had asked, well, who else in leadership influenced me, and I would be remiss to say if I don't acknowledge the profound leadership work of Melissa Dodd. She was wonderful,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
what she taught me um, was, I even to this day I reflect on things and think, what would Melissa do in this case? And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what would she say? What would she do? How would she approach this? What would be her facial reactions and her body language in this moment? And she really took me under her wings and taught me. And it's not to say that she agreed with me 100% of the time, and it's not to say that I agreed with her 100% of the time, right? But she was that mentor to help me grow from my mistakes.
Yeah.
And that was pretty powerful.
This is a nice segue to the next question, and I'm still going to ask you to reflect a little bit about what you're saying right now. But I mean,
Sure.
when you look back across your career,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what experiences most influenced the leader you've become today. So I feel like
Mm,
you've kind of answered that, but I'm going to add a part two to that question, and you can still answer it.
yeah.
But if you also had to go back and talk to yourself, if you had the ability to go back and talk to Dr. Kristina Mattis 10, 12, 15 years ago, what would you tell Dr. Kristina Mattis? Um, and with while dealing with those experiences,
Yeah.
like if that makes sense.
It really does. What I would tell myself then, and because I tell myself now, like
Yeah.
my present self tells me what I should be doing, and so that my future self would be happy with me. And if I had the opportunity to tell my past self, I would say that in order to understand what kind of leader you are, what kind of leader you want to be, or how you want to lead, you need to slow down, not necessarily stop, but you need to slow down enough to what you said earlier, Chris, is to gain self-awareness and do some self-work to truly understand what makes you the type of leader that you want to be, that works for you, right? And so I did a significant amount of work on myself to
Mm.
really figure that out. And I would say that there are at least three areas that I learned about myself that then informed the type of leader that I want to be and the type of leader that I am. And the first being, and this is going to surprise some people, that I am actually quite analytical and logic driven. Um, I'm going to digress now, maybe for a second here. Have you ever assessed or conducted, administered the cardinal compass point personality test or whatever it
No, I've
is?
done the Myers-Briggs, I've done
Okay.
the Enneagrams, and then
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm really big on the Ryasec, which is a lot of the work that's being done in Chula Vista, Cajon Valley, and now at the county office of San Diego.
Oh, you know what? I think we cut out there for a second, but I think we can. Oh,
Oh,
my internet is unstable all of a sudden. I had a helicopter fly by. Maybe
that's
that's
probably what
what
it was. Yeah.
triggered anything. I'm so sorry
You're
about
good.
that.
You're
But
good.
so in short, this compass assessment, if you will, is that the, you know, it's like taking any kind of like magazine quiz, right? You answer the questions, you calculate your score, and then you figure out if you're an A, B, C, or D. It's kind of like the same thing here, where your north compass point is more of like your action oriented doers. Your easts are like your forward thinking visionaries. Your souths are your, I guess, like your empathy driven emotional seekers, and then the relationship builders. And
Mhm.
then your wests are your detail oriented analysts, right? And what I have found through my leadership journey, if you will, is that these traits are not mutually exclusive.
Mm.
And if you desire to have a well-balanced team, you need representation from each of these compass points on your team. And as a leader, what I have found is that you need to actually encompass, no pun intended, each of these points, because and in a somewhat balanced way. And even more so on that is that, much like, because, like, we all have competing priorities, right?
Yeah.
How do you sequence your priorities to make sure that everything is met in a strategic way? And I have found myself as a leader sequencing out these compass points where I need to know where we're going. I need to start out as an east so that
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
have a clear vision and direction. And from there, it's engaging the voices and your team members through relationship building and the empathy driven approach that then allows you to determine that the details and the detail oriented analytics so that you can put things into action, right, as a north. And that it's not this spectrum, but this pendulum that you as a leader need to navigate continuously so that you can maintain those relationships and you do read those metrics that you are on track for success. So, and then you keep, the progress moving as an action doer. So, it's it's these types of approaches when it's like logic driven, right? And so that's like the first part that I've done some internal work to figure out like what actually drives me. And
Yeah.
it's the logic piece. And then just personally, it's that level of autonomy
Mm.
where I would say being independent is my fundamental character. And it's not to say that I have to do things on my own, but I do thrive where I have the time and space to reflect and to think, and um and just really making sure that I'm not being micromanaged. And I hate micromanaging. I'm really bad at micromanaging because I don't have the time and capacity to micromanage.
Yeah.
I would say that if you are brought on a team, if you are hired either by me or by somebody else, that you're the expert. Like, I just innately trust you to
Yeah.
get the job done. And so, as long as there are clear expectations and clear agreements, and we're truly on the same page, then go get it done. And it's not to say that I won't be there to support you, right? Because I do believe in servant leadership, that we're
Right.
here
Right.
to support each other. But I don't want to. I have no desire to hover over you and to
Yeah.
meddle in your business. You're a professional. You were hired because you're the expert. I'm going to trust you that you can do that unless you repeatedly don't come back with results. And that's where my trust starts to dwindle
Hmm.
because there are other people that rely on you and depend on you to get your work done so that we can move forward as a team. But overall, I would say it's that level of autonomy
Yeah.
that is needed. Um, and then I would say lastly, and this was another piece of that internal work that I did with myself, I am self-reliant. And that could be a plus or a negative, right? It took me a lot of work to come to the realization that I need to ask for help, right?
Hmm.
And we can use those cliche phrases of, teamwork makes the dream work, or more hands make the light work, or whatever it is, right?
Right, right.
Um, but truly, it's if we're working together, I expect that everybody contributes. And I ask for help, you ask help of me. We're in it together through thick and thin. We're going to make this happen. And um and there are times where I've been hurt and let down, disappointed,
Hmm. Hmm.
where then I just want to revert right back to past practice and say, you know what, if I need something done and I need it done right, I'm just gonna do it myself. But that is not the right thing to do. And
Right.
it takes a lot of self-awareness for me to not revert back to my past practice. Um, and so how can I coach and guide and make sure that we hold ourselves and each other accountable to continue working together to make that necessary identified progress? And so, whether it's, yeah, so I'll stop there if there are follow-ups, but I can definitely say that in order to be a leader, look inward first so
Yeah.
that you know how to present your realizing that your leadership style may not work for everybody, and that's okay. And I think that that is something that we tend to forget when we are interviewing for new hires, or if new hires are or candidates are interviewing us, right? It's a two-way street during that interview process. And we don't often think about, or we forget to ask about, what kind of leadership style is there in that work environment. Because if that leadership style doesn't work for you, it's not going to change going forward if you accept the position. Um, you really want to make sure that it's a good fit. Is the candidate a good fit to meet the leadership style that's being presented, and is the leader going to be a good fit for that candidate? Um, and I think that's something to consider as well.
100%. And do you feel that it's important to at times maybe explicitly give teams an opportunity to recognize what strengths they see in their colleagues? So that way they look at it as a form of unification rather than a form of division or jealousy. And the reason why I asked that is because I'm never going to forget my first year teaching. And now that you broke down the whole compass mechanism, I remember being a part of a professional development like that. And
Mm-hmm.
there was I was in a team of, it was a total four of us in the sixth grade team in the school when we opened up. I had one colleague that when I would bring up ideas, she would always question like every little detail about it.
Mm.
And I'd be like, and I was more like, hey, let's just go for it. Let's just do it. And it's like, where tension would like eventually happen. I mean, it would happen. I mean, eventually, tension would happen in our like team collaboration meetings. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until maybe like the second quarter after our fall break where I just had this epiphany. I'm like, wait a second. What if I was more like her? What if I asked more questions? Because this last first quarter, I had all these complications that happened during the lesson. And then when I would ask her, how did your lesson go? She went, great. She said, were there any issues between it? Like, no. And I realized that, like, because she's asking all of these questions before then, and
Mm-hmm.
it's allowing her to even, and I mean, she also had 7 years ahead of me in teaching. This was my first year teaching, but
Mm-hmm.
she was like, I learned to respect, and even after that, when we would have team planning lessons, to like actually just keep my mouth quiet. So when she would ask questions, I would write them down and then try to answer them. Or and it was more of an appreciation, or even just a simple of like, hey, you know what? Thank you for asking that. So do you again, it took me to realize what I get frustrated about. Now I'm realizing I need to appreciate that trait about her rather than getting annoyed by it. I'm going to
Yeah.
actually appreciate it because I can see now that I'm not asking these questions and she is. And if I were asking these questions that she was asking, I'd probably save myself a lot of headache when it comes to teaching these lessons. So
For
going back
sure.
to the original question,
Yeah.
should there be some explicit awareness of like, hey, everyone, I want you to recognize possibly where you're weak and where your teammates are strong and seeing how that complements each other.
Great observation there, Chris. And I would say it's not necessarily focusing in on where are you strong, where are you weak. It's that we have these different innate personalities
Hmm.
that we bring to the table. And there, I was just jotting down some ideas as you were talking. And
Yeah.
when we would have team meetings, whether, for whatever it was, right? Cabinet level or teacher meetings, whatever it was, um, one one piece of advice that I would say is designate roles for people
Hmm.
during meetings. One of which being the devil's advocate or like the provocateur, somebody that pushes the questions, right? And it doesn't have to, it should not be the same person each time, right? There's some strategy behind that. You give everybody an opportunity to start asking the questions, to have a voice at the table. And it's that, and there's no blame or shame then on that role. It is that person's role to push the boundaries, to push the comfort zone through questions. And so uh, that is one way to then engage in conversation to make sure that we are looking at a situation from as many different angles and perspectives as possible. And I would also say then another great exercise is looking at the conducting a like a pre-mortem exercise. So rather than waiting until after a lesson or after a unit or after a project to look at, well, let's take a look at all what went wrong. And now in hindsight, let's figure it out.
Yeah.
Try to run that exercise before launching. Try to figure out what are all the potential risks. What is anything and everything that could potentially go wrong? And then as a team, come together to collaborate and brainstorm solutions so that you have something already in place. Or better yet, you could actually avoid that risk and that problem altogether because you've already addressed it prior to launch. So there are ways to address it and give everybody a chance to role play, if you will,
Yeah.
uh, in their different comfort zones. So if you have somebody who's more of that south, right, the emotional relationship builder, but you as a leader need them to be more analytical, have them take on that role, right? It's temporary, it's low stakes, low
Nice.
risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ideally, it's in a safe space, but it gives somebody an opportunity to branch into building up their skill sets where they may be needed.
That's wonderful. And speaking of building up skill sets, and that leads us to our last question as we approach almost this entire car ride.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Already?
Yes, that's right.
How much
Um,
traffic has there been?
hey, well, it depends who's listening. If they're in LA
Oh
County,
my
they
God.
got probably 15, 20 more minutes. But
Yeah.
if you're driving down the street, like if I have a friend that teaches in Lodi and he takes like 10 minutes to get to work. So
Mhm.
this is probably his third day of listening to this podcast, but this episode at least. But on that aspect of young professionals, of taking notice, of even having that temporary aspect of positioning yourself, of looking at the other side, What
Mhm.
advice would you give to a teacher, a coach, aspiring administrators? You've had the opportunity of sitting in and starting as a teacher, working at the district level, working at the state level, working at the university level, and like what advice would you give to any aspiring individual in education that desires to be a leader in the profession?
Well, coming from somebody who had absolutely no trajectory in going into educational leadership or change management or design thinking, I would strongly encourage and urge people to find an external coach,
Mm,
a coach with who understands the field of education, who understands the bureaucracies and the hierarchies and the organizational charts and understands just the ins and outs of working in education. Having a coach, having somebody who is neutral, who is objective, someone who you can bounce ideas off of and someone who is that trusted advisor who can listen and then maybe follow up with those questions, not and have you find the answers. But in general, find somebody who you can call up and say, hey, I have no idea what's going on. I need help. I need to just bounce ideas off of you.
and that's a nice, this is a nice circle back to having that self-awareness
Absolutely.
of being able to,
Absolutely. Be humble and vulnerable enough to realize that having that person to consult with,
yeah.
um, that you don't have to do it all by yourself. If you ask for help, it's true. It's honest. If someone is asking you for help, it means that they truly need it, and it's time for you to step up and help them.
You know what? Mic drop. I think this is a great way of finishing the episode. And I do want to put a to be continued because there are other things I want to talk to you about. And I also want to dive deeper. Hopefully, I would love to dive deeper into later on this year or maybe the start of next year already. And that is the design thinking and your experience with that. And because as you were mentioning your history with that, I want to dive into a podcast that was released about a year ago from MIT, who
Mhm.
actually did an in-depth study of how the design thinking process started at San Francisco Unified and how the impact it had in conjunction with developers at the Silicon Valley and Stanford University. So, again, I think that's an episode itself already. That might
Yeah,
even have to be a two-part episode because I'll send
it
you
it
the
could
podcast.
be. It
Yeah,
could
I'll send you
be.
the
Yeah.
podcast so you have the context of it. But I want to gather your take because of your experience working on that, and at the same time being connected to NorCal, as well as you are connected to NorCal. So
Yes, yes, absolutely. I look forward to continue our conversations now and in the future. It's been a true pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Mattis, and thank you for all of you that are joining us today. And one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is just the importance of being able to be self-aware and recognizing just when to ask for help, but then also being able to recognize the strengths of those that are around you to be able to make those changes and to be able to grow and to be able just to level up at whatever department you are in the field of education. So again, thank you, Dr. Mattis, for sharing your story, your experience with us today. And to our podcast listeners, thank you for joining us for another special episode of the Innovative Pedagogy Podcast, the Leadership Series. And if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Kristina Mattis and her work, be sure to check out the episode show notes. I'll have a link to her website, her LinkedIn, and also to her book. And at the same time, you can contact her there. But those of you that wish to engage and send me questions or follow-ups, please feel free to send me an email to cbgarcia@sandiego.edu, or you can also check out my website at garciaedtech.com. All right, thank you to all of our listeners, and we will catch you all on the next episode. Take care.